Hello, you're listening to On Israel in Al Monitor. I'm Ben Caspit from Tel Aviv. Israel has long branded itself as the startup nation. Once known as the people of the book, Israelis are now recognized as the people of high-tech and cyber power. Technology has turned Israel from a poor nation into a prosperous world leader, from a country relying on handouts into a sought-after ally. Today, we will take a break from our usual discussion of politics and security. Our podcast will deal instead with a bit of history and philosophy, with the threats and challenges of the confusing world in which we live and its impact on our lives in general and on Israel in particular. Is the technological revolution equal in scale and significance to the industrial revolution? What are the major changes it has introduced into our lives, and what future does it hold for humankind and its planet? What threats does it pose? How can we deal with them? And of course, what Israel, as a small, flexible, adaptable, and fast-moving state, should do to preserve its current standing on the world stage and even improve it. Our guest today is Yonatan Adiri, who served as a CTO to the late President Shimon Peres. He was also his political and diplomatic advisor, the 9th President of Israel, and is considered a leading entrepreneur in healthcare technology in Israel and beyond. We'll discuss all these fascinating issues with him after a short break.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Hagedorn, and I'm the State Department correspondent at Al Monitor.
And I'm Joe Snell. I'm Al Monitor's video editor. Let's admit it, this past year has been difficult to stay on top of the news and sift through what's accurate and what's misleading. Let Al Monitor help you.
If you care about the Middle East and North Africa, you should consider listening to Al Monitor's audio series On the Middle East with Andrew Parasalidi and Amber and Zaman, and On Israel with Ben Caspit. You can now watch our newest video podcast, Reading the Middle East with Gilles Capel. You can subscribe to these series on your favorite podcast platforms.
And through a host of free daily and weekly newsletters, we offer a range of perspectives with the highest journalistic standards. You can subscribe to these newsletters at almonitor.com.
As an award-winning media service headquartered in Washington, D.C., Al Monitor has a network of over 160 contributors around the world.
So if you haven't done so already, be sure to visit almonitor.com, where you can find all of these newsletters and podcasts along with first-class reporting and analysis.
Now I'm happy to say hello and welcome here my friend and colleague, Yonatan Adiri. How are you doing, Yonatan? And thank you for joining us here in On Israel in Al Monitor. Good morning or evening to you.
Hey, Ben. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure. Looking forward to the conversation.
Okay, so let's start with an easy question. How do you define the era in which we live compared to the history of humankind? Are we living through one of history's most important revolutions? Will the digital technological revolution impact our lives to the same extent as the industrial revolution, for example? Is the invention of digital computing equal in value and scale to that of electricity, for example? Is Bill Gates as important as Thomas Edison?
Well, I think, fundamentally, we are living in an incredible era, but I would not equate to the era of the late 19th century when Thomas Edison and others have operated. I definitely will not consider the strength of invention that we're experiencing over the last 15 to 20 years to resemble the impact on humanity that electricity had, or the light bulb, or aviation. But I do think we are living in an exceptional and very impactful period in time in history, which is fundamentally the consequence of a combination of two trends that have never happened at the same time. Humanity has experienced exponential growth in technology before. in different periods in history, around the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, and the post-Second World War era. What we haven't experienced yet, and the last decade was indeed that, is exponential growth of technology that is combined with an exponential or near exponential decline in price at the same time. Now, let me give you a couple of examples so our listeners will understand. When we think about something that's really dear to everybody listening to our conversation today, which is bandwidth, right? How quickly and how strongly can we engage over our mobile phone? A decade ago, we had 3G mobile networks that ruled the earth. They allowed for about 5 megabytes per second bandwidth, and we were charged half $1, 20 cents per SMS 10 years ago. 5 years later, 2015, 16, we're at the era of 4G, right? This 5 years, and here we are 10x that capability. We're getting endless bandwidth for free. From $1 per SMS, 5 years later, we're doing HD video over mobile. For perspective, it used to be about 3 hours to download an 800 megabyte film on 3G, which ended up taking less than a minute on 4G just 5 years later. Today, we're getting into 5G. We're gearing up to 1 gigabyte, another 10x. Practically for free. To those listening to us abroad in Israel, you pay $12 for an unlimited package in Israel. There is no Netflix, there is no TikTok, there is no Disney Plus, Snapchat, or any other thing. If bandwidth doesn't explode like that, well, at the same time, cost doesn't go to zero. A couple more quick examples. In 2001, it cost $100 million to decode a gene. Today, it costs less than $1,000. And this is why we could decode a virus like COVID and develop the compound that turned into the FDA-grade vaccine within 42 days of its discovery. Again, that is from $100 million to decode a single gene 20 years ago to $1,000 today. And maybe the last one, which I think is an important example because, you've raised Bill Gates, I would say Elon Musk is not less of an important person in terms of, when we'll look back at the 21st century. When you think about the electric car industry, we measure batteries by kilowatt hours. A kilowatt hour in a battery pack allows for 6 kilometers of range for the car. In 2010, Ben, that is 10 years ago, not 100 years ago, a kilowatt hour cost $1,100. That means that if you wanted to travel 450 kilometers, you would have had to pay $100,000 for that battery. That same battery today is at $140 per kilowatt hours. It's a 1 order of magnitude less. That's 90% price decrease in a decade. And you pay $10,000 for a 450 kilometers of range. So these are just a couple of examples of how crazy this era is. And I think what is unique about it is not that it's great in terms of the discovery. It's the pace of growth of tech that's almost happening in parallel to the decline in price.
I remember now a guy in Israel, I guess you will remember him as well, named Shai Agassi. Actually, he was the first Elon Musk. I think 10 years ago, he tried to bring the electric car to Israel and he broke his legs and filed for bankruptcy exactly because what he just described. The timing was poor. Right now, it's going to, I think, conquer the world. And actually, time became a product. And I want to talk to you about time. From what you've been saying, I gather that time has essentially grown shorter. The time periods needed to do almost everything have shrunk significantly. People live at a completely different pace than they lived throughout history. Everything grows or shrinks exponentially. Processes that used to make months or years can be completed within hours or days. I look at our kids. When we were young, we planned to find a decent work and go on until retirement. Now I think that 8 months is the average time capsule that a 20-year-old guy is working in a working place. So something very essential has been changed according to time.
Ben, I think you're spot on. It takes less time to grow a business. It takes significantly less time to discover. Again, remember, 42 days from the discovery of the structure of COVID until we had a compound that went into clinical trials. And that time shortening is a radical shift in how humanity is built today. Just to give you an example, there is something going on as we speak today. It is happening clearly in the US and is now growing into the macroeconomics of Europe as well, which is called the Great Resignation, right? So many people are leaving their jobs, looking for a new job that the workplace doesn't know how to adjust. And the last, I would say, 12 to 15 years shown, as you've instinctively understood, when things take shorter, it is also the time of the startup, right? It has never been easier to dethrone the king, right, so fast. And we've seen many kings being dethroned in the last decade, some of them in the commercial space. If you just think about it, 12, 13 years ago, Apple, launched its iPhone in year one, 2007. It sold about 1 million units when Nokia sold that year 435. That's 435 times what Apple sold. 3 years later, Apple was selling, 40 million units. Nokia was down to 120. So within 3 years, Nokia went to a quarter of sales. Apple today is a $2.5 trillion company that is 80x Nokia. Just to give you a sense, Apple launched its AirPods, the white earpods, I think 5 years ago. It is now selling $12 billion of revenue, just the earpods. That's more than NVIDIA, one of the world's leading chip makers, is selling every year, and almost half of Nokia's current, global revenue. So yes, everything is taking shorter. And I think humanity and the structures we built over the last 50 to 70 years are ill-equipped. They're not aligned with this pace of change.
So the supersonic speed of events has its advantages, as we've just discussed. Are there also downsides?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, this is closer to your sphere of coverage and expertise. I think the massive downside is this has also been a decade of distrust. Political systems and socioeconomic, habits we built over 15 to 20 years have collapsed. And the systems are not adapting fast enough. And I think the outcome is a broad distrust in the systems that we all have hoped and trusted to be there next to us when things go sour, as they have in the last 2 years. So I think this pace of change has really driven political systems and big systems that we all relied on into the brink of being irrelevant. And to a great degree, the thing that connects a lot of the experiences we're seeing across the globe, I think, is this air of distrust. When you're looking at something like the Bitcoin, which in effect, right, has no value, outside of the value attached to it by everybody who buys and sells it. To me, the value of Bitcoin is adjacent, or is a great predictor of how much, distrust there is in the world towards the existing systems. So yes, I do think that there is a downside. The downside is that the systems we built for so many years have failed us, and there is a growing distrust. The best proxy for it is the price of Bitcoin, in my view. And that is something we're going to need to grapple with. And I do hope we'll know how to, jump back as societies very quickly, because otherwise, in previous histories, in previous events like that in history, this ended up with collapse or with violence, which I hope we're not going to see as those systems collapse and no new systems emerge to replace them.
Yes, I think I feel exactly what you just described. Nothing is, you cannot trust anything or anybody anymore. Life is not solid. Nothing is predictable. Professions disappear within 2 months. I'm talking also about my profession as a journalist, now in the year of the social networks, and etc. But let's try to take our conversation maybe to politics. Do you think will our era require a new kind of global leadership? with the character traits that we look for in our leaders in this age, different than the ones we looked for until now, experience, responsibility, and so on. Will speed take the place of thought? Because I look at the President of the United States, the leader of the free world, and let's say he's 78.
Yeah, so I think, I've had the privilege working with President Peres of traveling with him in meeting 60 heads of states during the 3 years of the term where I had the privilege of working with him. And I think the style of leadership that emerged to me as the winner of the second decade of the 21st century, and I think this will take us into this decade as well, was what Angela Merkel brought forward. We are talking in Israel, the country that brought the emergence of Daniel Kahneman, Professor Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel laureate, and I'll borrow from him and stand on his giant shoulders in his beautiful terminology, calling this thinking fast and slow, or leading fast and slow. And I think this is the major challenge of a global leader today. You have to move really fast on some areas. You have to be a great decision maker and move fast on some areas of policy, where on the others, like science, pure R&D, elements related to social welfare and the social safety net that you need to give people in order to not lose hope and not lose trust. There, you need to move really, really slow. And this is hard. These are contradicting traits. And I think what we've seen from, call it 1990 to 2012, 2015, was the kind of instant leadership that really worked well with the Bill Clinton example of, the pace of MTV. And subsequently, we've seen leaders, grow on broadcast TV and being the face of the nation on a Friday night. That doesn't work anymore. And I think the worst we can get, and we're seeing populist leadership fail now after emerging and ascending so fast between Orban and Erdogan and others. They have gone too far. They went into managing and leading super fast, without slow, without truth. So I think we need leadership that knows how to operate on both of those. I think Angela Merkel was a great example of that. And there are now emerging leaders around the world that I think understand this better. And so, yes, I agree with you. I think this era does require a new kind of global leadership.
You just mentioned the late President Shimon Peres that you've been working very close with, and I knew as well. And I want to, let's leave our issue for a second and talk about him vis-a-vis everything you just said, because he was in his 90s, and also when he was in his 80s, he predicted so many things. He was talking to me about nanotechnology, I think 15 years before it happened. I thought he's I thought he's insane. And then he was talking about no more governments controlling or leading or managing the world. This world will be a world that is managed by huge and super companies like Facebook and Google. And he said it 20 years ago. And everything happened. We were mocking him. But although he was, a guy that was born somewhere in the beginning of the previous century, he saw it coming. So what was his secret, in your opinion?
I think that secret really relates to this combination of thinking fast and slow. I think, while you move fast, you can't give up on the fundamentals. President Peres, while he was able to move fast and be agile, had a very strong sense of where the fundamentals are. And I think that's, something we can't give up on. And this is also for Israel going forward. We want to move fast. We want to be as fast as TikTok. We want to be as fast as Twitter, also as we communicate as leaders. But there are fundamental areas like military strength, like infrastructure, like the strength of universities and basic science and basic research. Those are things you cannot give up on. And I think President Peres understood that even as we step into the 21st century, the fundamentals that make us who we are as humans are not going to move. They're not going to change. And I think that's a critical piece in the worldview of a leader going into the third decade of the 21st century, understanding that the fundamentals are not going to change. They haven't changed, and most likely they will not. Female liberation and equality and female participation in the workforce is going to be critical. It's going to be crucial. Productivity, total productivity in the workforce is going to be crucial. The strength of scientific institutions and trust in government, all those are not going to change. And so I think that's what he saw, when he was talking about nanotech or, stem cell research and others, he understood that these are fundamentals that are not going to change. Those who will master, material science at the nano level will most likely hold the keys to prosperity where it really matters in the 21st century. And I think he wasn't wrong. I think when you look into, how things unfolded over the last decade, more or less, at least in my field that I had the privilege of working with him, which was this sort of diplomatic/technological combination and dimension, he saw things ahead of the curve through this combination of fundamentals that were moving slow and required attention, and the high pace of change that social media kind of enforced on all of us.
I used to call him a high-tech dreamer, because his dreams, most of them came true, were so unique. But I want to proceed, and you mentioned that we are in an age. We live in an era when the conservative giants, the big firms and companies, are more vulnerable, because a young startup with the right idea can kill them or shut them up within 2 months. Let's talk about the bad guys. Let's talk about wars. Do everything that we just mentioned can affect as well the modern wars? Will it be more dangerous? Things will be. How will it look? Can you try to dream it for me?
Yeah, look, I think, is it a dream or a nightmare, first of all, right? I think that's question number one that we're looking into. Well, I'm an optimist, and I actually think it's more a dream than it is a nightmare. And I think what happened with COVID also gives me good reason to adopt an optimistic worldview with regards to the next decades. But let's take it again fundamentally. The law of accelerated returns, right? The fact that we had a decade where tech exploded and prices went down. If you look at it the other way around, you don't need that much money to create world-changing technology. And that affects both good and bad, right? So, if you think about the amount of money you needed to create a drone that could be GPS guided with a thermal camera 12 or 15 years ago, much like the battery on the electric car, would have cost you 1,000 times what it costs you right now. And so a lot of the advantages that standing armies had 15 to 20 years ago have been quashed, have been decimated. And we're seeing that, I think we saw it with the rise and also with the fall of Daesh at the time. The ability to, produce, HD over 3G or 4G internet from the ground and create a terror and create the effect that, in previous times only big armies could have, is a big deal. When you think about, suicide drones that cost very little money, it allows for a country like Iran under sanctions with literally no money to provide water for its citizens to put out there weapons that, are global grade, top 5 in their ability to veto or create and cause terror. And so I think, the next decade, we're going to see an unfolding of more and more of robotics and drones and technologies, are also cyber, for that example, that are going to be deployed very accurately by either sub-state actors or not rich countries in a way that could create, havoc and massive damage. My biggest fear towards the next decade or two is, a dirty bomb, or a biological warfare that would be created by a terrorist organization. Because when you think about the advancements in biotech over the last decade, again, that 42 days from mRNA for COVID to discovery and conclusion about a compound, which is now the Pfizer vaccine, what prevents a small group of very well-educated terrorists who distrust? Remember, they don't need to be terrorists. It can be people who just distrust and have a disgruntled worldview in carrying out, that kind of attack. I think it's never been easier than this day and age.
And we didn't speak about cyber yet. You see, I think now in Iran, you see almost daily cyber offensives and attacks that no one knows where they're coming from. And, two guys sitting in the Ukraine can shut up or shut down a hospital in Tel Aviv. And it happened, by the way, not in Tel Aviv, in Hedera. So it's also very dangerous. And like we just spoke about, the conservative giants that are so vulnerable, now I think it's the same with the superpowers. You don't need to be a superpower anymore. In order to cause a lot of damage, and he just described it. But I cannot finish this conversation without going to Israel, the country that we both live in. Do you think Israel can continue to maintain its qualitative high technological edge in this fast-moving environment? In other words, is Israel better suited and more adaptable to this age than other countries?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, maybe a quick comment on cyber. I think we're getting very close to the definition of when cyber is considered to be a kinetic attack in a response of the victim, right? So I think over the next couple of years, and I hope it's not going to be in this Iran-Israel context, but the time is coming very closely that a cyber attack is going to be interpreted as a kinetic attack, and the response will be kinetic and not cyber. And I think we're getting close to that, and a small miscalculation can get us there. And so I think that's the next iteration when it comes to cyber. We're now seeing like two boxers punching each other in 15 rounds through the cyber domain. I think at some point we're going to see a punch of cyber being returned with a kinetic punch by a military, and I don't think that's too far out. So that's sort of my thought on the next wave when it comes to cyber. When it comes to Israel, I am very, very optimistic. There's a saying I really love by William Gibson, a science fiction author, who said, "The future is here and it's just unevenly distributed." And so when you think about it, Israel's ideally positioned on the future distribution curve. We really have everything we need to win and turn this decade into a golden decade and truly double our GDP. I mean, there's no reason why Switzerland will end this decade, north of $1 trillion, and we shouldn't. The strength of the workforce in Israel, the exposure to foreign direct investment is phenomenal. I mean, we've seen Israeli startups this year raise north of $15 billion. Ben, we are a 300,000 people community of tech industry in Israel, not even 10% of the workforce in real terms. So when you divide that 15 billion to 300,000 people, I think we come out in top 3 of the world in terms of investment per capita in tech, which is completely private. So
do you have an explanation for this?
Yes, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt you because
go ahead.
An explanation to this phenomena that 300,000 people are producing those numbers you just mentioned in high tech, in cyber, in biotech, in everything.
Well, I think much like in the early days of Zionism, we are at an era of the avant-garde, right? And Israel remains, the Israeli tech industry is very much avant-garde in what we do. We don't, kind of improve. We don't start up companies that improve things by 10 or 20%. Most of the startup leadership in Israel is avant-garde. The vision that comes out of Israeli startups over the last decade is not limited to, okay, let's start this company up, raise capital, and sell it for 200 to 300 million, and figure out what to do next. companies like, Wix or Fiverr or Mymed or Imuni, and there are so many across biotech, across, bioinformatics, across infrastructure. We are building if you will, some of the sewage of the next wave of the internet. And that might sound like very negative, but the infrastructure, those who control the infrastructure, the sewage, the railway, and that is cyber, that is software as a service companies, that is cyber. This is what we're doing. And, if you think about the gold rush, the 1849, right? Like San Francisco 49ers. Back in the day, those who discovered gold were really, really great. Those who discovered the mines. And I think those are American, VCs, those are still American entrepreneurs. But the big winners were Levi's and other companies who made, the equipment for the gold miners. And I think the current Israeli tech industry is building the tooling for the gold miners of this modern day gold rush. And I love where we are in that context. And, I don't know who's going to win the next few decades. Who's going to win, much like the engine was for the UK or the diesel was for Germany. Is it quantum computing? Is it stem cell research? Is it CRISPR? Other things in bioinformatics. But wherever you look on that map of those technologies that will determine the future, Israel is either in the top 5 or in the top 10. And when you combine that with our character and the access to capital and the maturity of the industry, I'm super optimistic. I think we have an incredible decade ahead of us. We have the right political leadership to take care of the thinking slow. That is infrastructure, that is global talent coming in, that is, things like railway and, the cost of living. I don't think anything can stop Israel in really living up to its goals and really having a golden decade ahead of it.
I think you're the next Shimon Peres. You're very, very optimistic. By the way, we never mentioned that you're doing exactly what you just described.
Yeah. So, as the saying go, right? Practice what you preach. I think, when Healthy.io, that's the company I'm fortunate enough to have founded 7 years ago with a group of incredible scientists and tech leaders, is really turning the world of diagnostics on its head. We, with less than $100 million raised in 7 years, are competing with giants like Roche and Siemens, LabCorp and Quest and others through turning the smartphone camera, the investment that Apple and Google and Samsung have put in the selfie economics into a clinical grade medical device. And, it's clear to me, much like the political leadership, as we discussed before, and leaders in this day and age, we need to have a very strong sense of, tolerance for failure or hedged failure environments in what we do. And so I'm very happy to have spent the last 7 years outside of the diplomatic space, outside of the political domain, which, had really formed my identity, and learn how to form this hedged failure capability and align my tolerance at the company to grow really, really fast, but not be afraid to fail, and make sure that where we fail, we set it up in advance and we understand what we can learn from that. And I think that is yet another critical, piece in how to lead in this coming decade, understanding that things are going to fail. And when they do, you don't try to, save them too much. You just think for the next thing, the next opportunity that emerges out of that failure, and you go for that as fast as possible.
It was fascinating, really. Yonatan Adiri,
thanks for the opportunity.
Very much. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll take now a short break and come back with some final thoughts right after it. Toda, Yonatan.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you very much. Toda.
Hello, I'm Gilles Kepel, professor at Sciences Po and Normal Sup in Paris, and author of a number of books and articles on the Middle East. Through my new podcast, Reading the Middle East, on the award-winning media service and monitor, we will take a deep dive into the trends in the region with the authors and thought leaders who are shaping how we think about the Middle East. Reading the Middle East will be a fantastic addition to Al Monitor's outstanding podcast lineup, including including On the Middle East with Andrew Paraziliti and Amberin Zaman, and On Israel with Ben Caspit. You can subscribe on your favorite listening platforms. We look forward to your joining our conversation.
Thank you for staying with us. I think you will agree with me that this was an exceptional conversation, something totally different and highly interesting and fascinating. And I want to thank again Yonatan Adiri. I know him for many years. He was one of late President Peres' most gifted advisors for years. And what I take, among many other interesting things that he said, what I take from this conversation with Adiri is that I think he said it in the beginning, that when I asked him, are we in a historical era like the Industrial Revolution, etc., and he said that we are living in an incredible era, although it is not in the same scale or magnitude of inventions like electricity, light bulb, or aviation. But this era we are living in is exceptional period of time in history. It's a combination of two trends that have never happened at the same time. And he was talking about, one is the exponential growth of technology. And we have seen this before in times in history, but right now it is combined with a decline, very fast exponential decline of price. And this brings us to this very unusual era where I call it the area of speed or pace, the era of a huge traditional dragons being slaughtered by very fast, new and brave innovations, etc. I think this era, after these conversations, many opportunities, and it's also dangerous. Israel's place, according to Yonatan Adiri, is almost safe in the top 5 or 10 of the nations that will make an advantage of this era, and we all have to wait and see what comes next. I think it will come very fast, as usual. We are used to it in the last 10 or 15 years. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you here next week in the same place and the same time in On Israel, in Al Monitor. I'm Ben Caspit from Tel Aviv. Take care. Bye-bye.